So just briefly, I want to talk about where we are today, what the system looks like today, what its goals and aims are, and some of the things that are driving service delivery as we know it. As I mentioned, there are now 21 regional centers, and they support now more than 300,000 individuals with developmental disabilities. Each regional center continues to be an independent nonprofit overseen by a volunteer board of directors. And what this means is that the regional centers are responsive not only to the state, the funding sources, the Department of Developmental Services, but they are also directly responsive to their local communities because community members comprise the volunteer board of directors. Today, approximately half of the individuals that Regional Center supports are adults and the other half are children. Regional centers have three big goals that really guide service delivery. So in the early 90s, the regional center system was expanded to include the Early Start program, which is for infants and toddlers at risk of developmental disability. And so for those infants and toddlers, the aim is to help as many of them as possible to catch up to their same age peers through therapies and through early interventions. For children supported by the regional center system, it is to help them to remain in their family home. And for adults, it's to help them to become as independent as possible. Service delivery in the regional center system is driven by individual need. And it's through a cyclical planning process that each individual's needs are determined and then addressed and then evaluated. So the first thing that a service coordinator, who is the individual that helps to coordinate services for each individual supported by a regional center, so the first thing that a service coordinator may ask a family or the individual themselves is, what are your hopes and dreams? And those hopes and dreams really then go to setting measurable goals and setting shorter term objectives. So if the goal is that an individual will achieve employment, then an objective could be something along the lines of, in the next 12 months, the individual will explore various job sites or will explore their interests or something along those lines. So the next step is to explore the available resources. Regional centers were developed to fill in those gaps in available resources. And so when determining what services are appropriate to begin to address the goals and objectives, one of the first steps is to explore resources that the individual has at their disposal, either through natural resources. So we all have friends and families and communities that help us to achieve things. And so we look at where are those things and what are those available resources that the individual has at their disposal. So if the individual wants a job and the family maybe knows someone who runs a small business, would connecting those two individuals make sense? The next thing that we look at in terms of available resources are other government-funded programs or programs funded through health insurance or those sorts of things. And those can include things such as in-home supportive services. It can include medical therapies available through health insurance, a variety of other things, including educational services provided through the school system. So once we identify where the available resources are, we look excuse me, we look at where are the remaining gaps and then purchase services to fill those remaining needs. And following this process, then we, after a while, begin to monitor progress towards meeting those goals we established at the beginning, and the process repeats itself. So this is a process called person-centered planning. And the federal government has a fantastic definition of person-centered planning that I just wanted to share with you. And their definition is the person-centered service plan must reflect the services and supports that are important for the individual, as well as what is important to the individual. So we tend to think of things that are important for the individual as including those things that are important to maintain health and safety. So it is important for an individual to receive their medications. We think of those things that are important to the individual as those quality of life things that we all care about, those things that make it so that we want to get up in the morning and face the day. So it could be that it is important to an individual to begin their day with a cup of coffee. Their health won't suffer adverse effects if they don't, but they certainly will not be as happy and won't feel as fulfilled if they don't get that. So person-centered planning is really about, in a very small nutshell, finding a balance between what is important to maintain the health and safety of the individual, as well as to enable the person to pursue things that they really are interested in, and to live in a way where they have a tremendous amount of choice in their life. We couldn't get through a webinar like this without talking about money. And so I mentioned at the outset that in the 1960s, when the system was established, the federal government did not play a role in funding the system for the most part. And then in the 1980s, we began to receive federal dollars for the system. So in this current fiscal year, which began July 1st, 2017, and will run through June 30th, 2018, the total community-based budget for regional center operations, as well as those services that they purchase from service providers who have the day-to-day contact with individuals, is $6.4 billion. And I apologize, I didn't update that slide to say 1718, but I believe these are 1718 numbers. So total federal reimbursement is $2.6 billion, so those are the federal funds. So 41% of our system of the funding for our system comes from the federal government. And so it is incumbent upon us, in order to continue to receive federal dollars, to follow the rules that the federal government has established. So they have expectations about service delivery that we'll get into a little bit later, but I just wanted to provide you with that context of why what the federal government is interested in is so essential to us here in California. And then just briefly, before we move on to taking questions, I wanted to talk about current trends that are impacting our system today. So our system has seen quite an evolution since it was founded more than 50 years ago. We are seeing higher rates of autism. We are seeing individuals living longer than their aging family members can support them. This is really the first population of individuals for whom a caretaker has to consider what happens to this individual when I can no longer be there to take care of them. We have to think about individuals with multiple diagnoses. So there are people in our system who have very, very complex needs. About 24% of the people that are supported by regional centers have medical needs in addition to their developmental disability. About 11% also have a psychiatric disability in addition to their developmental disability. We also know that California is becoming an increasingly diverse state. And so we have to think about how can we best support people where they are? How can we support them in a culturally sensitive way? We know that today, almost 77% of individuals supported by regional centers live at home with their families. We know that 95% of people supported by regional centers speak either Spanish or English, but we know that over 40 different languages are spoken within our service system. And we know, for instance, that people have additional support needs. For instance, over 500 individuals supported by regional centers communicate using American Sign Language. We know also that as the times have changed, that individuals and their families are interested in more and more individualized services. They want to ensure that the services that they receive are truly a good fit for the goals and objectives that they have.